first question we've got is from Kenny Watt, who says, I assume you'll be discussing Boris.
Aye, the racist twat.
Should we bring some context to this, that his latest statements comparing people who wear the burqa to bank robbers and letterboxes,
wasn't it? Yeah.
But he said plenty before that's like very objectionable, and they've not done anything about him. Yeah, people with watermelon smiles, he said about black people.
Is the issue about is it because he's a politician? Are burqas fair game for comedy if you're not a politician, or are they never fair game for comedy?
Everything's fair game for comedy.
The issue is that he is a politician, as an elected official.
Yeah,
that is the issue.
Making jokes isn't his job. Comedians making jokes is their job.
Right.
And anything is fair game for comedy if you can make it funny. Even offensive things and things that you may find offensive, somebody else won't find offensive. And you finding some things offensive is the tax that you pay for the things that you find funny. And you should just fucking suck it up. Right, that's the rules of comedy. But he's not a comedian, he's a politician, and the rules are different. He's meant to not be offending people. That's not what politicians are there to do. They're there to be representative of the population of the country.
I think it's also someone in his position, he opens up the floodgates to people feeling more confident in the streets to be Islamophobic, attack Muslim women. And because Boris did it, and Boris, he was just foreign secretary, so it's all fair game now, isn't it? And that's the main worry.
Is it part of a bigger problem too, where people that would have been comedians or sideline commentators or offenders, they are now the politics, which is the problem? And where is Boris going to go? Is this part of his Steve Bannon reboot, if you like, to kind of retwig him and to just come out and be as offensive as he really is?
Almost certainly. The thing to remember about Boris is that he thinks he's Winston Churchill and he wants to be Prime Minister. And those are like the two fucking horns of Boris. That's all there is to him, really. Like, he's a fucking lying, shagging, racist twat. Right, and by shagging, I mean can't fucking be faithful to his wife and seems to...
He's had at least one affair, isn't it?
I think there's been... The murmurs are that there's multiples, and he seems to enjoy humiliating.
Can we not think about this too much? Just maybe a bit nauseous.
Yeah, I know.
We don't want to be graphic on this podcast.
It's just, I know. I mean, why? You'd have to be blind, fucking deaf, stupid, mute, God knows. But anyway...
Do you think it's a bit of a dog whistle thing? Because, like, in the article, apparently he was actually saying that he doesn't think burqas should be banned. Don't think they should be banned, but hey, listen, guys, I'm still on your side. Don't worry.
Right. Okay. So it's more about pandering to extremely horrible people.
Because he knows who his supporters are, doesn't he? He's not daft. He knows who his supporters are. He's playing to his own crowd when he's saying these things.
Has he come out in favour of Tommy Robinson yet? That's got to be like, that's when you get, that's like your fucking alt-right membership card there these days, is it?
What's his real name? Stephen Yaxley Lennon.
Yeah.
A double-barrelled name thug. That's a new one, isn't it?
That's probably because he was bullied relentlessly for that name. That's why he's turned out that way. He just get picked on. He seems like the kind of guy that probably get picked on quite a lot in school. He kind of has that slightly Napoleon complex thing going on.
Do you know how he started on his way? I read his history. He wanted to apply to be like a mechanic, like a airplane engine mechanic, and he got knocked back. And apparently it was one of those things. It's because of positive discrimination, and that's how I never get in.
Because we didn't want planes crashing and you're a fucking moron.
Yeah, exactly. But it's interesting how they all have this little kind of similar backstory,
I just wanted to be a painter.
Yeah.
Yes, it always starts off that way.
Did you hear one of his former staff or aides came out and said, I used to think he did his research and went to these areas, but all he does is sit about eating crisps and searching tweets about himself. And I read that going, maybe that's made up, but no, I can see him doing that.
I can absolutely believe that is what he does.
That's one of my ultimate hates with politics, is people that will say, do your research. Research does not involve getting high and going on YouTube and watching conspiracy videos. That is not research. Research is actually studying academia properly, researching history properly, and not just viewing terrible Alex Jones films and going, I've done my research now, I know what's really going on. You haven't done anything, mate. You just watched a 2-hour documentary full of shite.
The more confident someone is about stuff like that, the more they're absolutely just full of shit. They really are. Oh, you have to believe this. Oh, do I?
I'm always suspicious of confidence.
Yes,
confident
I agree.
people. Confident people are almost always wrong. If you've thought about anything, you won't be confident about it.
To bring back to the question then, do we think that Bojo is set to go for Tory leadership and Prime Ministership, or do you think he's going to go the UKIP wee rebel Steve Bannon road?
I don't think Boris would see himself in that role. I think UKIP is like a burst ball, really. So
Yeah.
he's about preserving himself, I think. So he wouldn't go that route.
He's not going to go that route because he won't get to be Prime Minister. I mean, I just want to say I don't think he's going to get to be Prime Minister anyway, because the vast majority of the Tory establishment don't want him, although he is very, very popular with all the arseholes out there who kind of run the Tory local branches, because they're all wanks, presumably. But he's not going to go the UKIP route. You're quite right, UKIP's fucked. Do you know what I mean? It's over. So, no, he's going to try and stay in the Tory party because that's his route to being Prime Minister. Don't underestimate the people that Theresa May has pissed off, like Justine Greening and Dominic Grieve, or even Phil Hammond. If you've noticed...
Phil Hammond, I could see that, actually.
Phil Hammond is ever so quiet. Ever so quiet. Suspiciously quiet. I'm a mum, and I can tell you that when your kids are little, there's a phenomenon, and every mum will tell you this, that there's a phenomenon where you suddenly realise, fuck, I haven't been bothered for 15 minutes. What are they doing? And it's a sudden rush of panic about the fact that it's really quiet. What are the little cunts up to? Right? Philip Hammond, what have you heard from him? When can you... I mean, he's the Chancellor. When did you last hear anything from him?
Contrast his coverage or his words with, say, George Osborne when he was Chancellor, because Georgie Boy was everywhere when he was Chancellor.
That's because he wanted to be Prime Minister and he thought he was next in line in that way, and he was trying to keep a profile up.
Osborne's a very, very strange man. Very, very strange man. I'm quite fascinated by him. He seems almost like an android. I think he seems to be one of these people that he doesn't really care what anyone thinks of him. And I always think that's a quality that these sort of psychotic leaders that tend to do very well have to have.
I've heard rumours that he's a massive cokehead.
Oh, nothing that's more than... I think we could say rumours if we want to with that, but I think I mean, did you see him the day was it following the Brexit thing? And it was one of his last videos in Parliament, and he was a mess. I mean, he was like, looked worse than me. You know, I mean, he was absolutely baggy eyes. He looked absolutely like he was on something, or on the worst come down of his life. He seems to have cleaned himself up quite a bit since he's got the job doing the paper, because I think he actually has to work to do that, so he can't be out of it 24/7. Whereas thinking politics, if you just kind of schedule your speeches, okay, I've got 2 o'clock, if I do the drug intake here and there, if I can land it perfectly for 2, do that for 30 minutes, then go back on the booze.
I don't think you'll find there's any absence of journalists who manage to adequately maintain a good level of drinking and cocaine and still manage to work quite hard. So I don't know that that's necessary.
I think, but if you're editing, I think maybe it's more tricky, perhaps.
Yeah,
perhaps. When you're editing the paper, you have to be slightly more under control. I don't know.
Well, there's that classic little clip that people perpetually circulate on Twitter. And when the first few times I saw that, I just thought, yeah, you could slow anyone down and they'd look mad. And then I found the clip in its original context.
Yeah,
right, no, that's not in any way slowed down. Yeah. He really is sat there. He's coming up on an E, if I had to guess. He's coming up on an E because he's got that like he's getting that sort of, the acceleration that you get. Obviously, admitted.
I wouldn't know about these things.
No, well,
But it's like, because if you watch, I mean, it must be David Cameron, I'm assuming, who's doing the talking, and like all the other eyes are facing towards the opposition base directly.
Yeah,
whereas he's just like watching something going around the room.
Fucking unicorns flying over, shitting rainbows.
This is why I find the man fascinating, because I want to know what he is seeing. Like, what is in your twisted little
living
head?
His best life.
I still think he'll make a comeback. I think he's a very, very, very fucked up man.
Going back to like the Boris comment, one thing that kind of annoys me about these kind of like right wing guys making these kind of daft jokes at the expense of Islam is that it makes it hard for people like me who might like to actually criticise Islam and certain aspects of things that some Muslim people do. It makes it very hard for me to do that without feeling like, I'm like one of these kipper people.
Yeah, I mean, okay, if you want to get into that, then, I mean, the thing that intrigued me about it was this idea that the statement was racist. this is where we get a bit edgy with what we're saying here.
I was going to say, the floor's creaking from the dodgy territory we're getting into here.
The ice is very thin.
Through the minefield.
I think religion should be mocked in all its forms,
Yes.
and I think all religious dress is fair game for humour. In the same way that, like, I would want people, regardless of where they come from in the world, to be able to make fun of Christianity without being called racist. So I'd want everyone anywhere in the world to make fun of Islam and be able to do that without being called racist. We're entering a world where just to criticise ideas and concepts, which is all religion is, at the end of the day, that's all it is, in the same way that Santa Claus is an idea, that you can't do that now without being called racist. So if someone believes in Santa Claus and I make fun of their Santa hat, is that racist for me to do that? Because white people could wear the burqa, for example. So,
yeah.
you know.
Firstly, the thing that Boris is referring to with the letterbox is not a burqa. Burqa's like the full thing that women were having to wear under the Taliban, where you can't even see their eyes. They've got a gauzy bit. Yeah. So he's wrong as well as being fucking wrong. But the thing is, generally speaking, the people who are wearing that kind of dress are women of a certain colour, and he knows that, and that's the dog whistle element of it, actually, is that, you know, so it is racist, and it's kind of backdoor racism, because you can say, well, actually, I'm talking about the religion, but you're not really, are you? You're just having a bash at brown people, really, aren't you? Let's be honest about this. Humour is funniest when you are kicking up, not when you are kicking down. That's always true. Boris has a position of enormous authority.
I'd say that to make fun of Islam, you could be kicking up. I think you definitely think you could do jokes against Islam that would be
but not
up.
against women who are wearing a dress that automatically, to some extent, suggests subjugation. Now, whether or not it's voluntary that a woman wears that garb or not, it is in some way suggesting. I mean, I find the idea of women being asked to cover in that way abhorrent. It would not be something that I would do for myself. If a woman chooses to wear it, she has the right to do so. I would always want to know whether or not it is her choice, or whether or not is that actually just the product of upbringing and being told that she has no choice. There's massive complexities to this, and so the idea of somebody like Boris taking the piss and trying to make fun of that complex, morally difficult thing is just repugnant.
I agree. It's punching down in that. Yeah, you know, everything's fair game. We can mock it, but it's the minority population that's getting made fun of by, you know, like upper class white male in a position of power.
Yeah.
So that's where the issue is.
I was listening to I was watching a really cool interview between Michael Parkinson and Muhammad Ali, of all things, recently. And Muhammad Ali was obviously a Muslim, and this topic came up, and it was like the two worst takes, in my opinion, you could possibly have from either men. They were both bad. Because Michael Parkinson was like, what's wrong with, you know, women wearing bathing suits and bikinis out on the beach? Nothing wrong with that, is there? You know, good to look at, you know. So you got one end of it, and the other end you have Ali basically saying like they should cover up, because if they're seen like that, a man's going to try and attack them. And I kept thinking, both of these opinions are terrible. Like, the problem is the idea that men cannot control themselves, and therefore we have to cover women up in that way. You know, that's actually the point. So I think that you could punch up a joke that's centred on that, and attacking the male idea of forcing women to wear certain clothing because they can't control themselves. But that's not how he formed the joke. The joke was on the woman that had to wear it, regardless of it being a choice or not. And that, to me, is where the humour failed and did not work. Because the witty way to punch up at religion and Islam is to punch up at the weakness idea that men are so pathetic that they have to force women to dress in a certain way because of their own weakness. That should be insulted, and that, I think, is punching up. And you can do good comedy centered around that. But that, I think, is the point you're making here, I think is a very good point, is that the victim of this joke is not the perpetrator of that, which I blame is the man. It's the woman wearing the burqa. And I don't
see, if you did a comedy sketch on, you know, punching up at the men like that, what you would get is, I've seen them on Channel 4 and read articles, very educated Muslim women who choose to wear it and very eloquently put across their argument that, you know, it's a woman's choice, we don't need you to defend us, which is what they would come back with. My own personal view is it's very easy for that 1% of kind of Western women to do that. To me, I'm like, do you speak for the 99% in the Islamic world? You know, so each thing you bring up causes other issues and other ripples, which is why it's almost best. Yeah, everything's fair game to make fun of, but you have to view the context and, you know, the current world.
This is a very extreme comparison, but it's almost like when the Iraq War happened, how like George Bush and Tony Blair just thought that they could export democracy like opening a Starbucks, and it's just like we can just enforce this culture right away, and there it is overnight. The same thing kind of happens with comedic culture, because we're so used to mocking Christianity in the West. So like saying that nuns look like penguins to us would be like a throwaway line that you wouldn't really even think of that much. Yes, it is offensive to, you know, presumably Catholics and nuns and so forth,
and penguins,
but and penguins as well. More offensive actually to the penguins. But if that was on the telly, you wouldn't think about it being that bad. Like Father Ted, for example, is like all about this kind of humour, which is brilliant. But we're used to that and thinking we can get away with this. Therefore, we apply the same rules to all the religions. But I think what you're now seeing with the immigration end of that is that what we were culturally ready for most of the 20th century, other parts of the world aren't ready for that yet. Like, we're not ready to poke fun at our very, you know, strongly held beliefs in that way. So for people in the UK and possibly America, it's quite healthy to do that. Whereas to people in the Middle East, that's going to be really shocking. Like, whoa, you cannot be saying or doing that. So you'd be like trying to do Father Ted like 2 or 3 centuries ago. You couldn't have done it because it would have been too far over the line.
I was going to say, Father Ted,
Red Hot
example.
Pokers.
You had to wait until the 90s for that to be fair game in Ireland, and even then it was Channel 4 that commissioned it and not RT. So
I think it's like, it's not that all these jokes and stuff are necessarily wrong. It is, you say, just being culturally sensitive. We're in the year 2018 right now. This might be something for the year 2035 before we get to that.
Have you seen the Sacha Baron Cohen show, This Is America?
I have watched none of it, I have to say. I have a very low tolerance for kind of cringy shame feelings.
You must have almost had a heart attack watching that Theresa May thing where she was asked what your hobbies are. I mean, that was the most agonizing. I thought it was absolute genius. I thought you could not write cringe comedy better than this. But it was the most painful 30 seconds of your life.
Nearly chewed my own hand off.
Yeah. I ran through a wheat field. The farmer wasn't very impressed.
You've not seen the more recent one where she's going like, she's talking about how she likes cooking, and she's like, well, I like cooking and it's good because you can cook and then you can eat it. Andy Kaufman could not have created something that perfect. Tommy Robinson has now sort of edged its way into becoming vaguely normal, which obviously it's not. It's fucking madness. But it's now just the way it's been framed and covered in media. It's now become like not the most mental thing to defend Tommy Robinson, even though it really should be the most insane thing.
Here, yet again, I blame the BBC for the tone of their coverage, going right back to having the BNP on Question Time. Should never have been on in the first place. They have perpetually given these fucking arseholes a place to speak and given them kind of equal billing with people who aren't horrible.
That's the problem. I think it's okay to have given UKIP or whatever the odds, seat, but they had them on. You look at the statistics, it's just all UKIP. Farage has been on about a dozen times or something.
Yeah. One thing that really annoyed me recently was, I think a clip of theirs, I think through great effort on their own part, went viral, and it was one of their newsreaders interviewing Sean Spicer, and how this clip was like, look at the BBC standing up to Sean Spicer and telling him how it is. I'm not sure you can really make that claim when you're given like the platform to Nigel Farage and BNP and all this for years. I think they're now trying to retroactively go, oh, that wasn't our fault. We're actually the intellectual lefty people that are standing up to these crazy alt-righters and going like, that's not really what fucking happened at all. The BBC, I think, by far have helped Nigel Farage's career more than anybody else in the whole of the UK. So for them to say like, we're standing up to the alt-right and we're putting Sean Spicer in his place, I think is ridiculous when you look at their coverage of things like UKIP and the BNP and even stuff like Tommy Robinson, because the thing about the tone that annoys me, it's like when they talk about the royal wedding, they're allowed to express emotion. If you watch, they talk about, and now we're going to go to the wedding, oh, look at the cake, and they have the wee smile on their face, and the newsreader, they're expressing emotion. But for some reason, when they talk about the kids being put in cages, it's just like, and 20 kids at a time are being locked up in a cage now by Donald Trump. And now here's the weather. And there's no emotion attached to it. But if you're telling them they can express happiness in these clips, they should be able to express trauma, sadness. You should be able to express a connected emotion to this scene.
Yeah.
And what is weird to me is how they broadcast stuff that is obviously quite horrific in this incredibly robotic way. So it normalises what you're seeing.
Yeah, this is why I much prefer Channel 4, where it's a very, very different tone. Their journalists are given the latitude to actually respond as human beings. And it's a very different experience watching it. I mean,
but this is why I think that this is why not to get too kind of conspiracy on it, but it's obviously they must be being told by somebody that when they're doing like the fun bit about the royals that they're allowed to have that tone of voice.
Yeah.
But there must be someone telling them that they're not allowed to do it when it comes to the other stuff. When you talk about like the kind of the kids in the cages, if you don't react to that emotionally, you're then telling the audience this is normal, as in we've just talked about, there was a bill passed in Parliament today about whatever, and if you're covering that in the same tone of voice as the kids in cages, it starts to flow together. If you're willing to cover things like the royal wedding and so forth with that variance in tone of voice and add emotion to it, there is a hypocrisy there. And that seems to be something that's dictated. And that troubles me a lot because it does seem that there might be some kind of agenda to normalise stuff that really should not be normalised.
I think there's sort of two schools of thought about what journalism is. You know, there's I have to be impeccably neutral and not taking a side, or there's journalists who are essentially advocating for something, investigative journalists. And there's a great quote in A Quiet American by Graham Greene, which is all about exactly that battle within. For it's a foreign correspondent set in the 50s in Korea, and he's trying to be impeccably neutral as the war begins to happen and the Americans move in and this and the other. And one of the locals says to him, eventually, if you're going to remain human, you're going to have to take a side. And that's the BBC tries to never take a side. They try and be, we are the public broadcaster, we give it equal time to opposing views, and that's where they go wrong, because that's why they get a fucking climate skeptic on against a scientist. That's actually the root of all their problems, is that attempt to try and be neutral is that they give uneven ideas equal billing.
Good Morning Britain had Steve Bannon on it. He was brought on and was presented as, I think it was, former Trump advisor and Brexit critic. And we just never mentioned the fact that he was the head of Breitbart, which is all based around white supremacy. It was never brought up. And again, it was presented as like Susanna Reid standing up to him by disagreeing with him on Brexit. Not disagreeing with him being a Nazi about the Brexit issue. And that, to me, again, that's part of that. You're normalising something that should be totally abnormal. This is like having Joseph Goebbels on The Big Breakfast. It's just a weird thing that should not be occurring. But the way it's presented is just being totally normal. And the way they tend to do their show is they'll have Piers Morgan often agreeing with stuff which is quite outrageous and ridiculous, and the way they balance it, I think it is Susanna Reid, and as long as she sort of shakes her head going then suddenly that's all right.
I think the problem is you can never really be truly impartial or objective. It's just an impossibility for a human to actually do that, because everyone's got an agenda, and all you're doing really, if you're part of an organisation which has a kind of a thing where you have to try and attempt to be like that, you're just faking it, really.
Yeah.
You're just trying to make it look as if you're objective, where actually you're just covering up what you actually think.
I think you're right, it's more dangerous because I think that normalisation thing starts to occur, where if you don't express and react as a human being, you start to make people think, well, actually, that whole kids being shoved in cages stuff's actually all right. And that's where it gets dangerous. Whereas if you express that as a, look how horrendous this is. I mean, all the newsreels, if you go back to the kind of the 30s and the 40s and stuff like that, coming out about, what the Germans were doing and things like that, there was a tone to that. Like a lot of the footage that was used, like the Nuremberg trials, the way that was covered in the newsreels, it's not like we're just going like, the Holocaust, like where we're talking and we're having a tone of voice that expresses the horror of the Holocaust.
Yeah. We're
not just objectively covering the mass genocide of a race here, going like, and so many Jews were killed today. Like, we're not doing that. It's expressed as, a human reaction. And the way that the BBC and a lot of the news teams at the moment just don't seem to do that troubles me a lot.
I don't think
it works.
someone at the BBC has also got a worldwide presence, it's got the history. they don't seem to realise that impartiality is actually quite powerful, and that's what they get such a strong reaction from people. I'm sure a few of us, when it was the Scottish independence, the coverage, I think people overreacted, but there was definitely enough feeling that it was definitely pro-union. I also get that feeling when it ever covers Israel and Palestine, that I think is very pro-Israel. I don't want to go down the route, but as time goes on and you read up on it and you look at the headlines, they change the little bit of word in here or there.
Yeah.
The images they use, they're meant to be impartial, but they're skewing the coverage, which that makes it a bigger issue, because they're meant to be the impartial BBC.
Yeah, there's so many examples where you can point to and go, but that's not impartial. So if you're willing to break the character, if you like, there should be a consistency to it. Either you can be emotional all the time, or you can't be emotional at all. There shouldn't be like this kind of selective decision to be impartial in certain cases and not in others.
But the problem that you have is that, as Free said, nobody is actually impartial. We've all got our own views, and a self-aware person knows what their bias is, but an unself-aware person doesn't know their bias, and then when they're trying to be impartial, they'll be impartial in terms of from their reference point.
Yeah.
And that's what the BBC is. You've got this very elitist organisation that is the British Broadcasting Corporation, that views itself as, the mother of truth kind of thing, Auntie Beeb, and it can't see that it's standing so far to one side of so many of these arguments.
Yeah. People assume that it's kind of very leftist if you're a right-wing person, and very right-wing if you're a left-wing person. But I think it's more that it's pro-establishment, and it's kind of reluctant for any kind of change.
Well, the other thing is the BBC is many parts, and the political news part of the BBC is a very, very different beast from the kind of arts and entertainment arm. That's full of lefties, but the political bit in London is absolutely full of people who were active members of Tory parties.
A good comparison with that is how Fox works in the States. If you look at like The Simpsons, for example, goes out on Fox, and it's obviously hugely left wing.
I think Family Guy as well, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. But then if you look at Fox News, and then you can start saying the hypocrisy of The Simpsons taking money from the same company that's also doing Fox News, the thing they apparently hate. But it's a good example of it's possible to be hugely left, as you say, in your arts and entertainment wings, and massively right wing in the other bit. But the other thing what Free was saying then about how people say, it's too left, it's too right. Again, if you're having that kind of slightly impartial view, it leaves it open to that interpretation. So if they broadcast the Mexican border situation in that completely non-emotive way, you can, as an extremely right-wing person, go, but they should be saying this should be a good thing. And if you're a left-wing person, they should be acting like it's horrible. But if they just react in that total, you can start to project things onto it that sometimes aren't even there. And I think that's where a lot of the Scottish nationalist problem comes in, where they actively look for stuff that the Beeb problem aren't even deliberately doing, but because it's left in that slightly ambiguous way, you can start to fill in the blanks and start to criticise it.
I don't think it's only like it's just a kind of little chink in the armour, or there's one dodgy reporter and that lays the seed in everyone's head.
Yeah.
So they're trying to look for stuff even though there's only a little bit there. I think just when it comes to news and debate, it's almost the way it's quite hard to be impartial and balanced with stuff. It's actually, do you not find it mentally exhausting if you're trying to do it yourself?
Yeah, I just don't try.
So but it's like the way the world's going now, it's turning into this, what side are you? And it's almost coming back to like the problem is the false equivalent of some of the debates.
Yeah.
If you use the climate change one, for example, like 1 in 50 scientists might be like, climate change is a myth. 49 are like, no, it's facts. So the BBC, let's get one of each on. So people see it as a 50-50 debate. You've got to make one decision. When it's like, well, no, in an instance like that, if you want to do it fair, you need all 50, and he's on his own,
Yeah.